One of the relationships that CBIA is most proud of is the relationship between us and OSHA and CONN-OSHA. Over the years, they've been very helpful to us in terms of our activities in the area of safety as we relate to our members. So in that vein, we are especially happy to have the head of CONN-OSHA, Ken Tucker, with us today, as well as the Deputy Regional Administrator of OSHA, Jeff Erskine. Jeff came in all the way from Boston, so he had a little ride this morning, so again, we are especially happy to have him. We're going to have a panel discussion with these two gentlemen, and the driver of the panel, so to speak, is Joshua Hawks-Ladd. Joshua is a partner with Pullman Comley, another organization that has been very helpful to CBIA. We look forward to the discussion with these three gentlemen, and I'm sure you will enjoy what they have to say. Without further ado, I'll turn the podium over to Joshua and have him take over.
Thanks, Philip. Oh, this mic works really well. We are really under the bright lights this morning because those lights are right in our eyes, so if we're squinting or looking away, you'll know why. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be in person as opposed to remote, and those of you who are remote, hello. It's our pleasure to have a conversation this morning. We are not going to show slides on the screens, but all the slides are in the materials. So to the extent that you want to look at anything that we talk about up on the stage, just pull out the morning session slides and you'll see Jeff has slides from federal OSHA and Ken has slides from state OSHA, so they're in there, but we are not following along. We're really going to have a conversation for a little while about the various issues that both of these organizations, agencies deal with on a daily basis and how they both can help you out in your businesses. Just a show of hands so we know our audience, and I'll start with the easier one. How many in the audience, live audience, are involved in the public sector in any way? Okay. And of those in the public sector, how many deal with the federal arena or state arena or municipalities? Okay, so as you can see, and this is what we predicted, the bulk of you are in the private sector, businesses or companies in the private sector, right? Okay. We're going to target our discussion primarily towards you because we anticipated that would be the bulk of the audience. And once again, so I'm Joshua Hawks-Ladd. I'm with the law firm of Pullman Comley. We're a regional law firm. I practice in Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New York. And I'm co-chair of the Labor and Employment Department of the law firm. And I handle OSHA matters both in the private sector, dealing with companies who sometimes are faced with OSHA knocking on their door that we're going to talk about, and also in the public sector. I'm a town attorney in a town, and we deal with OSHA, CONN-OSHA coming in and auditing our facilities and trying to correct problems when they find them. So I'm going to let my other speakers introduce themselves and explain what their agencies are and what they do very briefly before we enter into a dialogue between us. I'm going to start with Jeff.
Sure, thank you. Also glad to be here in person. It's been a long haul. I enjoy doing these things, and I hope that you're interactive. So, please ask questions. Anything you want to throw at us, this is your time to ask a couple government officials the hard questions. So, my name's Jeff Erskine, as you saw, as introduced and in the materials. My title is the Deputy Regional Administrator for Region 1. Region 1 consists of the 6 New England states. The Vermont is a state-only plan, but we do oversee them and also, work with them closely. So, I've been with the agency now 22 years. I worked my way up through the agency. I have a degree in management from UMass Amherst. I ended up working in the construction industry myself for a decade after college, so I really learned a lot about putting my hands on things and building scaffolds, digging trenches, tunneling. So to me, that's really important, and the new secretary aligns with that thinking as well. So Before we get going, I'd like to dispel a couple OSHA myths. I always like to do this at my presentations. First, OSHA keeps the fines that they issue because we self-fund. Absolutely untrue. We do not keep our fines. We are not self-funded. Second, individuals from OSHA keep the fines that they issue. Surprisingly, that's actually a question I get a lot, and it's absolutely untrue, except one time I did get a check made out in my name, sent to me, paid to the order of Jeff Erskine for $600,000. I still have it framed. I had to call the attorney and tell him he screwed up. So
Somehow it ended up at Mohegan Sun Casino?
no. Third myth, OSHA can actually stop work. We don't stop work. We don't stop work. We don't stop jobs. We can post what's called imminent danger. We have to go to other entities in order to stop a job or stop actual work. Fourth one, OSHA's goal is to put employers out of business. That's absolutely not our goal. Our goal is to make sure that people work safely, they go home healthy, and to actually educate. One more, OSHA is a large agency. We're incredibly small for what we cover. Last I checked, in the entire country, I think OSHA has close to about 800 safety and health compliance officers on the federal side. And we cover over 8 million businesses. So imagine trying to get to every business to try to have the impact that we want to have. Nearly impossible with those numbers. And the last one, OSHA is strictly an enforcement agency. Yes, we do enforce things, but there's more to us than that. And that's in one of my slides. You'll see OSHA comes together in the way of education, working with industry, alliances, partnerships. So we want to educate people so they do the right thing and understand, the guardrails. And then we do also enforce. And looking forward to engaging.
Great. Ken.
Good morning, everybody. As Jeff and Josh indicated, it's great to be in person than virtual. Virtual is nice, but in person you get to interact with the folks. The Connecticut OSHA program, first of all, I've been with the office for 36 plus years. I actually started my career and learned my craft in the Air Force. They trained me to, who knew, be where I am today. I served 7.5 years in the Air Force, had a little bit of a gap in safety and health, trying to look for a job, and I got hired back in '86. So worked my way through the ranks. I was an industrial hygienist compliance officer with the state for 18 years. Was promoted into management, ran our consultation program, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. And subsequent to that, in 2009, I ended up taking over the office, and I've been the director ever since. CONN-OSHA's programs are very similar to the feds as far as the enforcement, the difference being that our jurisdiction is public sector, so our jurisdiction is state and municipal employees. So any state government, all 169 towns and the subdivisions are our jurisdiction. We have a staff of 6 compliance officers that cover all of those. There's over 200,000 employees that are under our jurisdiction. So as you can imagine, 6 people, we don't get to the towns unless there's a complaint or an accident or anything on a program visit for probably every 7 or 8 years. Just depends on the number of complaints that come in. We also run a consultation program. The focus today is to talk about prevention and to talk about how you as employers, particularly for my end in the public sector, for when our enforcement guys go out, that you can kind of mitigate some of the effects of that. But also in the private sector, when Jeff's folks come out, either off through Hartford or Bridgeport, we run a consultation program for the whole state of Connecticut. So we do public and private. I also have fully staffed. I have 8 consultation folks that will go into the private sector to do that. I have 2 public sector consultants that do the same work in the public sector. So we do enforcement. Our fines are set by state statute, so they're not as aggressive as what federal OSHA has, but there's still an impact on the employers, and the goal is not to go out and issue citations and penalties. The goal, as Jeff indicated, is to make sure your workers are safe. Through my consultation program, we can mitigate some of those effects. So Josh, that's kind of a quick overview.
Great, thank you, Ken. So we want this to be interactive. We prepared to have you guys ask questions on an ongoing basis rather than wait till the end, although we do have a dialogue we're going to engage in. So feel free to raise your hand, although you may have to stand up because I may not be able to see you, or maybe a CBIA spotter can, great. Are you our spotter?
I'm your spotter.
Awesome. Okay, so when you see a hand, and wait for, before you ask your question, wait for the mic then from our CBIA spotter so that people online can hear you and everyone else can hear you. So feel free to interrupt. And with that, let me jump in. So I'm going to start with Jeff. Again, he's US DOL. Well, DOL, OSHA is part of the agency, but US OSHA. So Jeff, what do you see as some of the more prevalent problems for which OSHA cites businesses in general? And granted, we're in Connecticut, but you see, as he said, you see all New England states, right? So what are some of the more prevalent things that you see as an agency that you want these folks who are virtually all private businesses to know about?
So we have what's called the high four hazards. These continue to be problematic. One of the biggest ones is falls. They continue to be a leading cause of death. Falls, people for some reason seem to not want to tie off, or they create a culture where, hey, I'm only up there for a second, you know, I'm only going to be up there for 5 minutes, and down they go. So falls is a big one for us. Constant, I think I was talking to a few people earlier today, and they said, you know, you can drive around and always see people not protected from falling. So that continues to be one. Electrical hazards, some of the most brutal things that I've seen in all my days investigating come from the electrical industry. People who aren't trained in that industry should stay away from it, period, but there's a lot of people that don't, so very, very dangerous. I actually looked through Connecticut did a 2-year run to see kind of what was landing on the biggest citations in the Connecticut area from the federal side. And what seems to be big is, and this might have spiked because of the COVID situation, but respirators, which is 1910-134. We see a lot of respirator citations in terms of the use of respirators, respirator programs. Are people trained to use them? So that stand is pretty lengthy if you haven't read it. Another one was 1053 in the construction industry, which is ladder violations. I know that seems kind of remedial, but a lot of people don't use them correctly. They put them up, they use the wrong size ladder, they don't secure them, and down they go. An interesting one was not reporting fatalities. So there is a requirement that if there is a fatality that you have to report it, and within a time frame. That I saw kind of pop up. I think in the past 2 years, there's between 40 and 50 violations of that in the two Connecticut federal offices. And scaffolding violations are always up there as well. Fall protection was the largest. Another one is machine guarding. In general industry, we see a lot of machine guarding violations. Trenching and excavation is a big one. We have certain emphasis programs that allow us to enter a site. Like any law enforcement agency, we need a reason to come in, a complaint, a referral, or an emphasis program. So we have local, regional, and national emphasis programs. Cranes, falls is one of them. A real big one now that is evolving is tree workers and landscape workers. We've seen a rash of bad accidents and unfortunate fatalities in the tree industry. So we're really taking a look at that, focusing on that. And we actually just got through an emphasis program which allows us to engage with the industry. I mean, that's a kind of overview, but there's always more.
Yeah. When we were preparing for this and talking about it, so obviously I defend folks like you when OSHA comes calling. We're going to talk about that in a minute when OSHA comes calling and knocks on your door, what you do. But just in the past couple of years, I've had to defend cases involving auditory protection, vision protection, not wearing PPE, forklifts are a big deal, fumes in the business, chainsaws you mentioned, falling. We were talking about how they have so few employees, but you'd be surprised how many times they catch people just by driving by or getting reports. How often does that happen that someone's up on a roof and it's pretty amazing, isn't it?
You could do it every day. Yeah, that's all. You could just do that. Honestly.
Right. Yeah.
It's overwhelming. So.
And then how about machine guarding? How often do you get claims or incidents where someone has removed a safety device or done something to adjust a safety device and causing a problem?
I don't know if I could tell you how often, but I'd say it's fairly prevalent that when someone relocates a machine, or in the general industry world, or they don't put it back, or there's older machines that need to be retrofitted that they think are grandfathered. Not the case. If there's something that you can put your hand in or a part of your body in, you need to make it so it can't be so. Pretty simple concept, but not so easy. Some of these big textile machines that I've seen, you actually have to hire companies to retrofit them. So it does cost some money, but there's nothing worse than seeing someone go into one of those. So.
And I'll just tell you anecdotally, I'm involved in a lawsuit now where an employee, he removed the guard. He removed the guard, put his hand in, and obviously had a very, very bad injury. He, of course, not only was there an OSHA issue, but he, of course, sued the employer, a vendor, and everyone else he could after he removed the guard and put his hand in the machine. So you all need to be vigilant when you're dealing with safety devices. If you have an employee who's trying to get something done quicker, or he thinks or she is smarter by doing it that way, you all need to be vigilant with that, because I can't tell you, there's going to be workers' comp claims, lawsuits, years and years of litigation just by people doing stupid things.
To that point, if I may share a story.
Yeah.
Years ago, I did an investigation, and this one sticks in my mind. I'll never forget it, because you said the individual, the worker, removed the guard. I got called out at 2 in the morning where someone got caught in a palletizing machine. It was actually at Breyer's Ice Cream. Now, I don't know if they're there anymore. But, and I'm there 3 days, and no one can figure out how they got by the light curtains. They had like a double light curtain system, which is a protective thing that if you break the plane, it'll shut the machine down. They flew in the manufacturers. They had PhDs. They had people who could levitate tables with their minds, and nobody could figure it out. About 3 days into it, someone stands up in the back, an old worker, and he says, "I'll show you 3 ways to get by it." And I never forgot that. Those that do the work know the shortcuts, and they take them sometimes. Now, to that point, there is a thing called employee misconduct, which I'm sure you're well familiar with. If the employer has done everything they can to train and educate and be vigilant in enforcing their safety rules, and someone takes it upon themselves, well, that's a different thing. So, but that one's just stuck with me. I thought I'd share it.
Josh, if I may, real quick, in the public sector, we see a lot of facilities not go to the original manufacturer to get a piece of equipment. Woodworking equipment probably is the most prevalent that we see. And depends on where you buy that, they will actually come without guards. There's no requirement for them to put guards on a table saw, for example. So we've seen it where the employers have bought the guards, bought the table saw, and there's no guards. It's like, how does that happen? It's unconscionable to me. However, that's the stuff that we're seeing. So it's the employer's obligation, once it's on their property and the employees use it, to make sure that it's adequately guarded. So if you happen to not go through a manufacturer, but you go through a retailer or somebody like that, and there's not the guards on it, it's going to be the employer's responsibility to make sure those guards are in place.
So, okay, I'll take the question. Go ahead. Wait a minute. You got to get the mic, and then we'll take it.
Good morning. Two-part question. In our safety program, we cover, in our Toolbox Talks, we'll cover subjects, and we'll have the employees sign that they attended and heard. So what would be the benefit to the company if an employee went and did something that led to an injury, and it could be proved that they attended that very thing that they did? What, does that help? I mean, we're under the impression it does. I just want to know.
Well, sure. I mean, it's the beginning of helping, but you just touched on one of my number one favorite things that I did as an investigator. The second I walked on a site, I'd say, "Give me some Toolbox Talks," and I'd go, let's see, Greg, Fred, can I talk to Greg and Fred? I say, "Greg and Fred, looks like you signed off on this. Can you tell me a little bit about the session you attended?" So, yes, it shows that they attended it, but what did they retain? Because we get a lot of people who are just saying, "Sign those, say you were here." So I'm not asking them to recite the machine guarding standard or something you went over. Did they get anything? What did they take from it? Is it an effective training session? And what did they learn? So yes, I guess the answer is yes. It shows that you're taking steps towards educating people. I wouldn't say it absolves the employer of complete responsibility in the situation. Does that make sense?
And the second part is, do you have a prediction for the Red Sox game today?
I do.
Yes. You're not prejudiced in any fashion,
Oh,
right?
God, no.
You can ask me about the Mets. I won't go there.
Mets fan.
We have another question over here.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, talking about employees and responsibilities like taking the guard off or wearing their PPE. I've seen a lot of citations for 5A1, General Duty Clause. Do you know of any citations under 5B, which is that the employee has a duty to comply with regulations?
I've never seen that cited. Good question, though.
Just one.
Never. 22 years. I don't think I can recall us.
So, any other questions? I'm gonna continue on this topic actually, because I have a question for both Ken
Very
and Jeff. Let me just, my iPad keeps shutting off. Hang on one second. So I'll start with Ken, because this is this is universal, public sector, private sector. Do you, in your experience and estimation, do you think most of the problems that employers face relate to either a lack of safety equipment, poorly updated equipment, including PPE, a lack of training, carelessness, or intentional misconduct? I'll start with Ken, and I know it's a broad question, but what do you see in your years of generally where employers get cited?
So first of all, I don't think there's too many employers out there that don't have the best interest of their employees. This group is going to be totally different. I would say everybody here does, but there are some employers that do have an intentional disregard, and we see that from time to time. OSHA had that fatality trench job in Boston, where it was pretty egregious. We've seen contractors up on the roof, and as soon as somebody falls, they're running the opposite way. Don't want to even say, no, they're not my employee. They're a contract employee. So we see that, but most employers want to do the right thing. So generally, it's either not being aware of what the requirements of the standards are, or they're trying to keep their business afloat because it's just such a tight market that safety doesn't become the preeminent thing in what they do. And that's kind of where sometimes when we go in, we see that. We talked a little bit about, with your question, on the employee misconduct. And generally, the employer is going to have a handbook. They're going to try to do some basic training at the minimum, and they do a pretty good job of that. But what we see is, once we get out of the site, is even if we've done, say, a tailgate talk in your situation, your question, what's the next step after that we want to see? We want to see, has there been other instances of this happening? Did the employer take action against their employees? And that's where I think the gap happens, is we don't see employers really standing up to their employees saying, that's unacceptable, and I'm going to have to write you up, or I'm going to give you one chance, but not again. And a lot of times it's repeated again and again, and that's where the employee misconduct argument kind of goes down the drain for the employers, because it's not the first time. They turn their head, they may have said, put your harness on, put your hard hat on, whatever it may be, but they don't force it, and they don't enforce those requirements to do that. So the second time it happens, or the third time. Listen, the number one thing that we hear on any accident we investigate, it's never happened before. It's never happened. And the whole idea is you need to kind of start changing the mindset to be preventative.
Jeff, how about from your perspective, accidents, intentional misconduct, poor training, poor upkeep? What's the general trend that you see, if there is one, or all of the above?
Yeah, yes, and potentially yes. But going back, Red Sox 6-2, okay? So
Yankee fans, please don't mark anything negative on your evaluation of this presentation.
I'm thinking about being done.
And Mets fans remain neutral. Remember that. Go ahead.
you know, something we look at, and I'll go back to this gentleman's question on safety equipment, to the same point. I've seen so many people just throw harnesses or respirators at folks and just say, hey, put them on and use them. Now, we're not ignorant. We know profit is a thing that drives business. We're aware of that. But you got to take the time to make sure the harness fits the person, they know how to use it, the safety equipment is maintained. We've done investigations where harnesses and lanyards are so damaged when they put them on that I'm surprised they stayed on the roof at all or stayed up and didn't fall. So there's other things, respirators, are they cleaned properly? Do they fit the person's face? So there is that piece in it. I agree with Ken on intentional disregard. I don't think it's that prevalent. I did a run on actually to see across the country the percentage of citations from OSHA that fall in the willful category, and that's surprisingly low. Across the nation, in the past 5 years, it's at 0.84. So if that tells you what we think about intentional disregard, willful is our worst category. Egregious willful carries pretty hefty penalties, and it goes to the employer's state of mind. Did they intentionally know what to do and decide not to do it? That's really it in a nutshell, and it's a very low portion of what we cite. So I think that would answer that question.
It does. Thank you.
The best possible.
So here's a question. We'll get to your question as soon as I ask this question. So our spotter, if you don't mind going down there. This one we didn't prep for, but I want to throw it out there to both of you from the private sector and public sector. Who's responsible for job safety on a job? Let's take a construction site. And you've got an owner who owns the property and contracted for the business, could be a municipality. You've got the prime, you've got a sub, you've got a sub-sub, you've got the whole list. When there's a problem on the site, and I imagine it depends on the problem, and you come in and investigate, who's legally responsible according to OSHA for the safety violation? I'll start with you, yeah.
Start with me?
Yeah.
So you're getting into what we call the multi-employer citation policy. There's different levels that cascade there. There's, who is actually exposed to the hazard and who has the control of that site to make sure that they aren't exposed. So this gets into contractual obligations. We'll request job contracts from the owner down, and we'll start reading into them to say who actually has the responsibility here to protect the employee, and do they have the bandwidth or the ability to do so? So is the general contractor so far removed from the third sub that they have no potential impact, or have they given that responsibility totally over? My general answer to that is everyone should be, but in reality, we know how jobs work, and we're like, hey, this person, this is a sub to a sub to a sub. The GC has no connection to this company, so we're aware of that. I don't know if I answered it.
I think you did.
Okay.
And Ken, from the public sector side, well, obviously the public sector is contracting with large organizations, small companies, mom and pops. What's the state's perspective on job site liability in the public sector?
Very similar to Jeff's point. There's kind of two elements of it. One of them is, as Jeff indicated, who is the responsible party that controls that site, that directs the work. And certainly, it's generally, if you've got a contractor in there, you're looking at the foreman or the owner of the company, but then you start looking farther. When OSHA does an investigation or we're out there doing an inspection on something, we have to determine legal sufficiency to be able to issue citations. We plan, and I know OSHA does the same identical thing, every citation, no matter how minimal or how serious that it is, as far as the overall concern, is will it stand the test of a court? Will a hearing officer, when they hear this, administrative law judge, when they hear this case, will we prevail? Nobody likes to lose, right? Our office, we don't want to lose one citation. That's just our goal. And if my name goes on that citation, it's been vetted multiple times, not only by the compliance officer that did it, but by their supervisor and by myself, to make sure that if this goes to the next level, will it stand the test of time? So morally, I think, as Jeff indicated, it's kind of everybody's responsibility, right? But when we have to look at that multiple employee work site, we have to really look at who is the controlling entity. And that's kind of the decision that we have to make as we do the inspection, Josh.
And if I could add one item, for OSHA to have jurisdiction, there has to be an employer-employee relationship, period. You have to have one employee, okay? And that's the only way that we can have jurisdiction. Now, we know the subcontractor in the 1099 game and, people trying to say that they don't work for me, they're all subs. we've been through that 8 billion times, so we know how that looks. We use an IRS litmus test to say, there's some factors that we go through to say, hey, is there a relationship here? So it doesn't have to be as clean as I give you a paycheck, you've been working for me for 10 years, because some people try to hide the ball on that. At the end of the day, we just, hey, are you responsible? And we want to move the needle on safety, period. That's it.
Okay. We'll take that question.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'm a facilities manager for an aerospace company in East Hartford. I'm here with my safety committee today, and I was just wondering, is there a criteria for how often you should reevaluate your training as far as like lockout, tagout, forklift, scissor lift training, stuff like that? Is that like something that has to be done yearly, or is that a one-time thing? And how often should it be revisited? So, to avoid, maybe a new machine, or like we have a lot of CNC machine tools too that we're constantly getting in and out, and they all come with different guards and safety criteria. So is that something that we should be doing yearly or bi-yearly? I'm just wondering, as far as to cover us as far as safety with all of our employees.
It's a great question.
Yeah, great question. So some regulations will actually say that specifically, that you have to do annual training or such. If it doesn't say that, it's not spelled out, it's really up to the employer. Anytime something changes, you get new people in there, a new machine, or the machine's retrofitted, it would be strongly recommended. If controls are changed, or you're getting something different in the workplace, that's where we would go with that. So, we really leave it up to you. There is no written thing if it doesn't say it straight in the regulation.
Thank you.
Anything different for CON-OSHA?
No, it's the same, but where the pedal meets the metal really is, if you have an accident happen, we're going to look to see if that employee was trained on the work practices that they were doing and on the piece of equipment they were using. Even if the standard doesn't say once a year or once every 5 years, they still have to be trained on that aspect of it. Sometimes that training ends up several years earlier, but we are looking for training, but there may not be anything in the standard that requires it on a repeated basis.
Okay, go ahead.
We're a commercial construction company, and when you're hiring an employee, and if they get hurt within a couple of days of after being hired, how do you, and they have pre-existing conditions, as far as a shoulder or something like that, and they've had surgeries, how do you work with that as far as, with workman's comp and through OSHA and everything else, because you got to file for it, and then they're going to be out for a long term?
I can handle the comp.
Yeah, so from my perspective, the second someone sets a foot on that job, they should be trained and educated in whatever thing they're going to touch or whatever work they're going to be involved in. As far as workman's comp, I'm going to back away from that and give it to the expert here. So.
I just told Jeff I'd bail him out on the workers' comp side of things. But as an employer, you're responsible for maintaining a safe work environment. There's a statute that says that, several statutes that say that, and you're always responsible for safety.
I don't.
If an injury happens to an employee and it's their fault, you're still responsible. There is this misconduct rule, but it's very, very hard to get away from a workers' comp claim, especially under that rule, because workers' comp is a no-fault system, and stupidity is not a defense. So when a workers' comp claim is made, you're going to own it. It doesn't matter whether the employee is new, old, been on the job for 5 minutes, or 30 years. You're going to own it, which is why it's important that you have that insurance. You must have the insurance by law. Not maintaining workers' comp insurance is a criminal offense in this state and many states. So you have to have that workers' comp protection as soon as your employee steps foot. And unfortunately, there's no defense regarding an employee acting stupidly, and usually even intentionally. There's no defense. So one thing I want to mention is, because Jeff mentioned that the U.S. OSHA's jurisdiction is one employee, and ways that employers try to game the system is by saying, we don't have employees, we have independent contractors. That's not going to work with OSHA, because they're, as he said, going to use, he said, I think he used the IRS test, the 20-factor test, or the 3?
Yeah, I think 20, yeah.
Okay, there's many, many tests of who's an employee. There's a 20-factor test, there's a 3-factor test, there's the ABC test. We're not here to talk about that, but if you misclassify an employee as an independent contractor and think you're going to get out of your comp liability or OSHA liability, because you could just point the finger to them, you may have a huge fight on your hand, and that's where the rubber meets the road. You want to be extremely careful that you don't misclassify an employee as an independent contractor, either accidentally, most of the time it's accidentally, or intentionally, because when the government comes calling, they are going to overturn every stone to find that relationship to make sure someone's responsible, whether it's for unemployment, OSHA, or what have you. So be very careful classifying employees as independent contractors and trying to get away from that liability, comp, wages, et cetera.
And it gets into, we work now with the insurance fraud bureaus from each state. And I will give a plug when there's an opportunity to talk about Region 1's OSHA criminal investigation program, whenever we have time to get into that. To build off that.
As soon as you're done with your comment, go ahead and
Oh,
tell me
okay,
about it.
sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
To build off that, I'll just say that in workman's comp, insurance companies do request our accident files. So they do look at those, they do get those under the Freedom of Information Act, which is a whole other thing.
And actually, you should tell these folks about the reporting requirements for accidents too, that when they must report accidents under all the OSHA regulations. You might as well go ahead.
Fatality, been a bit since I looked at, loss of an eye, fatality, or hospitalization.
Okay.
Within 8 hours, right? I think it's 8 hours now?
Amputation.
Amputation, right. Correct, yep.
All right.
Amputation, loss of an eye, hospitalization, or fatality.
So you must report those. You were going to say something else about the criminal.
Yeah, so something new to OSHA, Region 1, which is New England, is the first region in the country, actually the first in OSHA's history to have a sole dedicated criminal investigator. So we have this person, you've seen that kind of entity in the EPA. He doesn't have arrest powers, or that position does not have that now, but this person takes the criminal element of what happens in investigations, mostly fatality investigations, but it expands beyond. You'd be surprised to find that once in a while, people tell mistruths to the OSHA investigator. So yes, it's true. We've been lied to. So much like you hear from the FBI, if you mislead in a federal investigation, you lie to a federal investigator. That now is true in OSHA. Okay, it always has been, but it's never been really enforced. This person takes that, he looks at signatures, he does handwriting analysis, so he's doing some things that the area offices used to do half-heartedly. Now, I'm not trying to scare anyone, I'm just saying he's taking that criminal element and enhancing it. He's working with the U.S. attorneys, the state attorney generals, the district attorneys, and really getting into the criminal world and the criminal element of where OSHA goes. So very interesting development.
Thanks, Jeff. And we are going to get to Ken more, but for most of you in the room, it's Jeff's jurisdiction that plays a bigger role, although we're going to get to Ken's agency and how CONN-OSHA can help you. But I want to focus on something that Jeff just said, because when I get involved usually at about 8 in the morning, where I get the call from the client and say, hey, we got an OSHA person here. I'm going to tell them to go away, right? And what's the rule on that? Can you just tell OSHA, hey, go away, or let's stop going for? That's what I thought. That's what I tell all my clients.
Absolutely. You can
that's a
refuse
joke for
entry,
all of
and
you
we don't
listening.
take it
It's a joke.
personal. Absolutely.
So what are the rules that when OSHA comes knocking on the door, what are the rights of employers to say, okay, come back in 3 weeks, or must you let the OSHA investigator in the door?
So you have the right as an employer to say either delay, I won't call it delay entry, but to say, hey, I'd like to get my representative here. We take that in a reasonable time frame, whatever that is, hour, 2 hours, depending on how far away they are. I need to call my safety director. I want someone to be available to walk through the site with you. That's more than reasonable. Can you refuse entry? Absolutely. You can say, listen, I don't want you to come in here. I'm refusing you entry. Then we take that as a denial of entry. We go back, we get a warrant, and then we come in. Normally is how it would go forward. That's happened to me once in my career. Once. And I'm not, listen, if you feel you need to do it, go ahead and do it. Your question over there? Yep. And then you also have the right to ask why we're there and for us to show our credentials. So we would have to produce a complaint to say, which would be, we wouldn't have anyone's name, we don't reveal complainants, but it would say the complaint items. Here's the complaint that was lodged against your company. Here's why we're coming in. Here's the items we're going to focus on covering. If we see anything else, we may expand the inspection, but right now that's what we're focused on. Or we're here for an accident referral or something of that nature. Did that cover it?
It did. And I just want to, before we get to the question, two comments on that. The delay is reasonable. I have had clients, at least in one instance, where the delay became unreasonable and they had to go to Boston and get a subpoena and enter, forcibly enter with the subpoena. They can do it. So it has to be a reasonable delay. And on that topic of reasonable delay, it is important that you either have your legal counsel or your local safety expert or other expert available there for many reasons. I'll just give you one experience that happened last summer. We had an inspector come in, an OSHA inspector come in. It had to do with dust in the workplace. And the inspector actually contaminated the workplace when she did the inspection and messed up everything. And of course, all her findings said, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. And we were able to prove that she caused some of the problems with the dust and ended up successfully, partially, winning the matter with OSHA. And we'll talk about what happens procedurally, how you deal with OSHA. But it's important that you respect the law, which is OSHA has a right to enter, but that you have rights as well. And those rights are call your legal counsel or get your safety expert in there so that everyone knows what's going on. And then we'll take the question.
Good morning. Jeff, I think a question for you. If you could maybe provide some advice in a scenario where you've got an employee who has what appears to be a medical emergency in the workplace or on a job site that appears to be related to some pre-existing condition, epileptic seizure or something of that nature, and that employee leaves the workplace and is admitted to the hospital, would it be prudent of the employer to notify OSHA?
Great question. So my general advice on that is when in doubt, either go to your legal counsel, ask them, do you recommend it, and they can do it, or if you don't have a legal counsel, yeah, I'd say to err on the side of caution, throw it to us. We don't dispatch people immediately on that stuff. We kind of listen and hash it out with the employer and say, okay, is it work-related? Give you an opportunity, but you've satisfied the reporting requirement if there's any questions, would be my advice. So you kind of check that box. You're out of harm's way in that way in terms of enforcement, and then we can hash out, was it even work-related? Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
And just for a little bit of the counter perspective, my response would be, hold on a second. Why are you calling OSHA for an epileptic seizure? Or, what we're seeing more and more, someone falling down on the job because they're drunk or high, or having some other medical issue. Why are you calling OSHA? Now, granted, if there's an injury, then you may have to, but you may not have to. From my perspective, call your lawyer first. Talk it through with your lawyer. I'm not just trying to generate business. I'm trying to protect you from all kinds of liabilities.
Sure.
Call your lawyer. Get the facts. I mean, this is a broad question. I mean, maybe you have to call. You may have to. But OSHA's not there to give you legal advice on how to handle the employee, how to handle your liabilities related thereto, how to handle a comp issue, how to handle the privacy issues that may be involved with such an event. OSHA's there for the safety due to a problem, an injury on the job. Right. So don't go run an OSHA. No offense.
None taken. I have plenty of work.
Call your counsel.
And if we found out later that it's not work-related and you reported it, that's fine. But he's right. If you know for a fact that it's not related to the work or the work environment, like you said, there is no need to call. But, we've had scenarios where later it proved out to be like someone got a shock and they didn't know they had a shock and it caused something in their heart. So down the line, it could be.
And you can always call OSHA afterwards. I mean, I'm not telling you not to call
You can if you didn't know. We're reasonable with that.
Do your due diligence. Yes.
I've got another question regarding subcontractors on my site. Whose responsibility if there is an injury? Like, for instance, I have a solar project going on top of the roof right now, and it is a bona fide subcontractor that we have contracted to do the work. If there is an injury or some sort of an issue that is not one of my employees, is it my responsibility to contact OSHA, or is that their responsibility to contact OSHA?
Oh, to contact OSHA would be theirs.
Theirs, okay.
It would be theirs.
And is that with any contractor at all on the premises or any one of my buildings? I mean, because it seems like it's my responsibility because they're on my site.
I mean, again, we're going to look at you know, the controlling, the creating, you know, who has the control, who created the hazard, who's exposed to the hazard, those kind of things. But that's a deeper question. We may have to talk
Okay. Thank you.
offside on that one.
And there's also other legal factors involved under the prime contractor rules and all that. So that's a difficult question to answer here without knowing more facts, but it's a good question.
A great one, though.
Josh, there is one other quick thing that I might mention. One, if it's a media report out there, we look at newspapers like you do. If we see it, or a television report, we may do an inspection because we heard that somebody went to the hospital, come to find out they went to the emergency room, got treated and released, which is not reportable, but we didn't know that. So we happen to see that. Secondly, the EMS folks, the fire, the police, the ambulance, dispatch calls us all the time. So even if you don't call and your town that you're in, the EMS people respond, they may call us independently, not even caring whether or not you got an obligation. But they're calling us because something happened. And sometimes it's credible and it's something that we need to deal with. Sometimes if I get a call, I've called my federal counterparts because it's private sector. Sometimes it's really no jurisdiction, and you know that dialogue will also happen with them. That no, we're not coming out to that on this one.
And you know, I'll be honest with you, if something happened on one of your areas or one of your sites and you knew about it and chose not to tell us and the sub didn't tell us, and I found that out, it'd be a red flag. I'm not telling you I'm going to cite you, but I'd be like, you know, you're telling me you knew someone fell or had an injury or something, and you decided to fall in those categories. You decided not to report it, but you knew about it or didn't prompt them to do so. So, I mean, it's not cut and dry, but there'd be some discussions.
And that's a perfect segue into our next topic, which is citations and penalties. I'll hear from Jeff first, and then Ken. So you come on site, the investigation's done, the report is written, and you're going through the report with your investigator, and you're deciding what you're going to do about citations and penalties. First of all, actually, before we even get to my main question, which is what discretion you have and what factors you use in issuing citations and penalties, what's your guidance on that? What do you look to when you're deciding to cite someone, not cite someone, and what the penalty should be? And if any of you don't know that if you've never been through it, if you ever have an OSHA violation, alleged violation, you'll get a report. And the report will say what the violation is, what type of citation, and there's gradients of citations, what type of penalty, monetary, and there's levels. So what's the discretion? What do you look to? How do you go about it? And then Ken on the public sector.
Sure. So when the compliance officers walk in a site, they're going to look at, first, like I said, the complaint items. If something else catches their eye, they'll expand the inspection. But there's different categories of citations. One, other than serious, which normally is reserved for like record-keeping violations or something that we don't take as that serious. There's a serious violation category, which is something that can cause serious physical harm or death. Most of our citations fall in that category. Okay, I'll call that like a mid-range, because that's a pretty broad definition that can be interpreted widely. So then we go up to repeat. A repeat violation used to be 3 years. It fell back to 5 years a couple administrations ago. So if we go in and we investigate you and you've had a like or similar hazard or citation in the past 5 years, we can decide to go repeat on it. Doesn't mean we're going to. We have that discretion, should we or shouldn't we. That's the manager in the office discretion. The area director is a person who determines that. Then we go to willful, like I talked about. A very rare citation. We hold those for the worst actors, but any regulation can be cited as willful, just so I'm clear. Anything can be cited as willful. And then we have willful egregious, which is that we're taking, I'll give you a quick example. Say I walked and I had 5 people on a roof exposed to hazards. I could go willful, 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 willful. So you get 5 willful citations, add that up at 100 and something thousand per, you get a pretty big fine.
What's the fine range for each one?
Geez, it just changed, so I can't quote. Serious are up around $13,000, $14,000 high end. Willful's $130,000, $140,000. So that went under the Michaels, under Dr. Michaels. That they tied that to the inflation index or something. So now the penalties increase every year tied to inflation. It used to be, for years and years, it was 7,000 max. So you can see they add up pretty quickly.
I think it was two summers ago that the new manual came out with the new, or maybe it was three, 2 or 3 years ago.
They just went up again recently, though. Cause
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Well, good to know. I learned something new today.
So as far as discretion, compliance officers have incredibly broad discretion when they're on the job to look. They're going to take photographs and measurements. Really, the test for us is it realistic that someone could be injured or contracted illness from this? Are they exposed? Do they have potential exposure or actual exposure? And we look at that. So we're not going to say, hey, here's a machine that's unguarded, but no one's used it for 12 years and it's offline, there's no power to it. Well, then there's no problem, right? One of the famous ones is the hard hats. Every time we come on, all the brand new hard hats come out on a construction site, everyone's running around with them. And I tell them, listen, yeah, we like that, I guess, but you don't need a hard hat if nothing can fall on your head. So it's really a practical look at what people are exposed to, what's the potential exposure. If you're going to go in an area where something can fall, all right, put one on. But, people definitely go that way. Then when they cite, when they're going to issue the citations, the compliance officer builds a report, recommends what they want to issue. It goes to what's called an assistant area director. That assistant area director reviews that file, may give it back and forth for a few changes and augmentations or some questions. May say why I think this could potentially be willful. At the end, it goes to the area director in that office to sign that citation and issue it. So,
Ken,
cover it?
Yeah, thank you. Ken, from the state's perspective, what are the penalties and discretion that you wield?
Well, very simple. First of all, our Bible that we work off of, and Connecticut has to adopt laws that are promulgated through the feds and programs through the feds. We have to be equal to and more stringent. So we try to be equal to, so there's no confusion with our private sector partners if we're doing consultations. But the field operations manual is kind of what tells us how we're going to do that. So we adopt the same field operations manual that the feds work off of, except for Chapter 6, which is the penalty structure. And the reason that we don't is the penalty structure in Connecticut is set by statute for public sector. So our maximum penalty and this goes back to 1989 and even prior to that, but that's since, I think the last time we adopted the FOM and the penalties was 89, is $1,000 maximum penalty for serious, $7,000 for willful. Now, Jeff kind of mentioned there's $13,000, $14,000. Very rarely you guys in the private sector are going to see that. As they look at it, there's a formula and a calculation that they do, but once they get to a point, what's your average penalty, Jeff? 4,000 or 5,000 maybe?
Yeah, in that range,
Maybe not even
5,500
quite that,
maybe.
yeah. And in Connecticut, with $1,000 being the maximum penalty in the public sector for a serious violation, it's probably between $400 and $500 at the most. All right, and that's what the employer ends up seeing at the end of the day once we run the formula. Number of employees exposed, how close they are to the hazard, how frequent the hazard exists, the working conditions associated with that. So there's factors that we have to look at, and our compliance office actually calculate before it gets to the management end of it to say, this is my proposed penalty. And that is, Josh, and I know you're going to talk about it, but that even gets before the informal conferences when somebody like you would get involved, they come in to discuss the penalties once the employer sees it.
That's right. So when I get involved is when the notice comes from OSHA with the citations and the penalties. Sometimes beforehand I'm involved, but generally. And you have a very limited period of time to contest those. I don't know what's the amount of time on the state to contest it?
There's 15 working days from date of receipt, same as what the feds have.
Oh, same. Okay, so the same. So you have 15 days to contest that. If you don't, you're done. And then when you contest them, and we can, if you want to discuss the whole process, if you're interested, but you have the right to ask for a settlement conference. First thing, you ask for a settlement conference. And you should know that these folks, at least the feds, are under very strict timelines. They need to process these citations and penalties very quickly, which is why, A, if you don't contest it, you're done, and B, if you don't ask for a settlement conference, then you're going to have to adjudicate it very quickly. And when you adjudicate it, it's at the local level. You first have a meeting with the area director, and the investigator is usually there, and you have a conference. And I won't go into the whole procedure, but there's an administrative procedure at the local level. Failing that, then you're generally, at least mine are in Washington, right? When you're appealing it, it's down to Washington, not in Boston. the first level after if you fail in Hartford?
Oh, no, it would be in Boston.
Okay.
For regional.
I've only dealt with Washington for whatever reason. But why would you contest it from our perspective? Well, number one, if you think that they're wrong, and sometimes, believe it or not, sometimes they make a mistake. B, if you think the citation is wrong, because Jeff gave you the list of citations. If you don't think there was a serious risk of injury, you can fight it and try to get the other than serious. And why is that important? Well, because when you get to repeated, if you don't fight the citation and you get another one within 5 years, you're going to be viewed as repeated. And there used to be, I don't know if this is true under the new guidance, the penalties are automatically doubled. So if you got fined $5,000, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you got fined $5,000 3 years ago and you have a similar offense now, you're going to automatically be in that doubling. And is it still double? Am I right on that?
It's higher, yeah.
Higher than doubling.
Severity and probability play in, but yes.
So depending on the client, I may tell the client, you got to fight this because I know you and you're going to have another one next month. And you need to get the serious knocked down other than serious. And we have a fight. I mean, a fight. We're not putting on our boxing gloves, but we have a fight like all lawyers and agency officials do. We argue the facts, argue the law, argue the standards. They throw the regulations at us and the findings. And we don't always know what the findings are. They keep it pretty secret until we get to an adjudicative stage. And we fight the fight until we can either settle it or not settle it. And I don't know if you want to comment on that process.
I would. I've done hundreds, if not thousands, of conferences that he's talking about. And my number one thing walking in the room was always this. I don't do them now because I'm in the Boston regional office unless they really get elevated. I have sat on some bigger ones in Boston. But for me, when I used to walk in the room, I'd say, give me a good feeling that this isn't going to happen again. That's all I'm asking you to do. Make me really feel for true that what I'm looking at won't happen again. Now, if you disagree with the regulation or the citation or what we cited, you have an absolute right to come in and discuss it. And he's right. I made a mistake once in my life. I'll never do it again. But, you know, the process is built in there, and we do listen, and we have change. But I need to know walking out of there that you're going to change for the better as a company, that we've moved the culture forward. And we do what's called enhanced settlement agreement. So we'll put things in there like, okay, I agree to, you know, send my people to electrical training because I'm an electrical company, or, you know, within 3 months of the signing this agreement. Something like that'll at least move the needle for us to say, hey, this company's really invested in pushing this and making it better.
And following up on that same topic, what are the factors that you look at to either reduce a citation or a penalty? I know many of them because I have to fight these factors all the time. You know, such as, for example, immediately addressing the situation, and that the employer immediately took care of the safety problem, whether it was well, in one case it was a trench problem. That those are very difficult to fight, because if you are digging a big hole and someone get trapped in there, you better have a trench. But anyways, talk about what are some of the factors you look at where you're being more lenient or more willing to reduce the citation or the penalty.
Sure, what you just hit on, is the employer being honest, authentically pushing forward and change? Did they address it immediately, or did they come in and just say, hey, listen, too bad, so sad, I got a lawyer here, and we're going to fight this just to fight it? Well, okay, then we're fighting it. If you don't show good faith towards moving the needle on that, towards moving forward to changing that culture, then we're going to have some issues, and I'm not going to let go because I don't want other people to be exposed. But if you come to the table and you say, look, you know, here's my safety training immediately after the accident, like you mentioned, you know, we called all our people in. We you know, that superintendent or that foreman, we took disciplinary action on them because they were responsible. I'm not telling you to admit it if you don't think it's your fault, but, you know, if you have some ownership of it and you're real about it, then we're going to look to reduce it. And then you say, hey, you know, I'm willing to do this. Would you go to other than serious? Well, then it's a discussion.
Ken, how about from the state's perspective?
So when we're talking about the citation, the employer gets what they call the citation notification of penalty, right? And that's kind of what we've been focused on. There's one key thing that's in there. Every time we issue a citation, it's either going to show corrected during the inspection, which tells us something right there, or it's going to have an abatement date. So when I have an informal conference and my guys, my manager's running that informal conference, I have parameters that I set up when I took over the office. First of all, we're looking at corrective action, all right? Nobody probably will get much more than 50% of a reduction when they walk in the door, no matter what they do. The penalties will not go away, and the feds are the same way. Unless they vacate a citation, they just don't take the penalties 100% away. So the employer needs to understand that it's going to be a reduction on the get-go. So we talk with the employer when we set up the meeting, say, listen, the best bang for your buck to get a penalty reduction is show me your abatement. All right? What have you done for me? Give me that good feeling that Jeff just talked about. I want to see the abatement of what we've done, and then we want to talk about how we move that needle, as Jeff indicated. What are we going to do to prevent this from the next time? So that's one way we do it. We also threw a couple of sweeteners in that is our discretion as management. And if they're willing to use my consultation program, I throw a percentage reduction into that. Why? It's because now I got the employer saying, I want you to come in and look at a different area in good faith, and you don't get cited, and we're going to talk, I think, a little bit about consultation. So with that, by using the consultation program, now the employer is taking that initiative to protect his workers. And then lastly, we have a training and education division. So we throw a percentage discount if you use our training and education to get training for people. Why? I just want people to be more safe in what they're doing. So if we can do that, I can at least get the penalty reduced to 50%. Sometimes we'll go a little higher, but at the average, when you look at it at the end of the year, it's somewhere around, give or take 40 to 50%, depends on the work that the employer's done.
So our next topic actually is going to be directed to you on CONN-OSHA's safety consultation program. But before we get to there,
Yeah. While we're on the topic of penalties, we have a question online that speaks to that. Is there any thinking from OSHA to increase financial parameters similar to EPA in an effort to get the attention of employers to take their responsibilities for employee safety a bit more urgent?
Can you repeat it
Sure.
again, Phil?
Is there any thinking from OSHA to increase financial penalties similar to EPA in an effort to get the attention of employers to take their responsibilities for employee safety with a bit more urgency?
I think that means the increased penalties, if that's what the intent is.
I don't know as far as related to EPA, but I think an increased penalty definitely gets employers' attention. I can't tell you the thoughts behind it from the assistant secretary, but I think I was in a room when they were talking about building the increased structure and tying it to inflation, and my best guess is that they just thought that it had to keep up with the times. I can't answer that completely to say, is it intended to get the attention of employers? I don't really know. I think it's probably inherent in how it's built, yeah, possibly.
Before we move on to this discussion with Ken, I just want to go back to the last topic and talk about when you are, after you're cited and you decide to either fight or have a settlement conference, and I almost always advise my clients to have the settlement conference because either you can resolve it then or there, or at least you understand OSHA's position more clearly at that time, and then you can always fight it afterwards as long as you stick with the very, very tight time frame, very tight time frame. So don't wait to get your legal counsel involved. But I always tell my clients, don't lie to me. Don't ever lie to your lawyer. You're not helping yourself. Just like in the criminal context, you lie to your lawyer, they're not going to know how to defend you. In this context, if you lie to your lawyer because you think somehow it's going to help you, it won't. Because here's what happens, and it happens all the time. We go into this conference, and OSHA has a whole file on what the inspector found, and we don't have access to the file at that time. And we don't know what the employee said and what everyone else said, and they have a huge advantage. So if either my client's lying to me about what happened, and I walk into the settlement conference, and then the local area director says, well, that's not true, you're lying about that, because we already checked that. That's not true, you're lying about that. Well, first, I start sweating, because I'm like, and then I'm really mad.
I've seen that happen in real time.
Because there's nothing we can do. And the client, is, sheepishly looking down. If they know it, and maybe they didn't know it, because sometimes they're lied to by their employees, too. But you must, if you're going to defend these things, you have to let your counsel know all the facts, because otherwise, we don't know how to defend you, right? Because the facts that they have are possibly different than the facts you have. So make sure you tell your counsel everything before you go into these meetings. Otherwise, they're either going to be a waste of time or you're going to bury yourself even worse.
And one quick point on that, I do not recommend coercing employees into giving certain statements. We have the right to interview employees privately. Employers do not have the right to sit in there. They do not have the right to be part of that. He doesn't have the right to be part of that. So if the employee has an attorney or a rep themselves or a union rep, they have the right to bring them in, but the employer does not have the right. Now, we have seen and established many times that employers have kind of bullied or coerced employees, don't say this, say that, and that comes out in the wash. So I'm not accusing any of it, I'm just saying, be careful with that.
And you reminded me of one other topic before we get to Ken. Sorry, Ken. But this is important for all of you in the room, and that is whistleblower protection and retaliation claims, because those are, I think I deal more with retaliation claims than anything else, especially during COVID, where for whatever reason, employees thought that it was a great idea to allege that their employers were violating COVID rules, no matter how compliant they were with CDC guidance and executive orders. But where'd they run to? Jeff's office. They have a special office in Springfield that covered Connecticut, or at least when I was dealing with them, where these folks would blow the whistle, quote unquote, on employers not complying with COVID guidelines, and we were fighting them left and right over the last 2 years. Now, thankfully, that's behind us. But talk about employee protection,
Sure.
Whistleblowers, and retaliation claims, so everyone understands all that.
Sure, we have a whole group of what's called whistleblower investigators. We have an assistant regional administrator that reports to me. She runs the whistleblower program. That's Section 11C of the OSHA Act. So Section 11C, now they cover 24 other statutes that are in depth and insane, but this one section ties them to OSHA. Basically says the employee has a right to file a complaint about safety and health in the workplace, and you can't ask them about it as an employer. You can't take retaliatory measures. You can't change their schedule or put them in a different job. You can't take anything that's called an adverse action based off the fact that they complained.
You certainly can't fire them.
What's that?
You cannot fire them.
Not for that.
Right,
So
right.
You can fire them for being bad employees. So, you got to be honest with yourselves on this. It's not a comfortable thing probably as an employer to know someone filed a complaint, but they have the right. So that they will come in, they'll do that separate investigation on what's called a whistleblower complaint, and then that gets goes down a whole different legal path. That is, we have special attorneys in Boston. That's all they do is whistleblower.
And they're good, and they actually dismiss claims that they know are BS.
They do.
But keep in mind, it's a separate claim, and even if the complaint about the safety complaint is invalid, if you, the employer, take action against that employee for an invalid claim, you could still have a retaliation claim, even if the original safety complaint was invalid. So keep that in mind. Now, I want to turn to
Real quick, let's just talk about timeframes.
Yeah.
Because they're different in Connecticut. Federal time frame for reporting whistleblowers, 30 days?
I think it is 30
Okay.
days, yeah.
In Connecticut, years ago, that's what we did. It's FOM, right? We adopt the same thing. We had a court case that came up on an individual that filed untimely and literally took it to the legislature, and we were required to increase the amount of time that public sector employees can file a whistleblower claim. So in Connecticut, it's 180 days from the time of the incident, just so you kind of know the difference between the two. Public sector has more time. 30 days is pretty short. If you got retaliated against, you're going to file the claim, but a lot of times these guys are probably not seeing it until termination, and then everything gets dicey because he was a bad employee and all that. But if a whistleblower claim gets filed in the public sector, it's 180 days. And we have, similar to Jeff's group, we have one person that actually does the investigations. It's our attorney from our legal department, and then one of the other attorneys does a lot of the hearings.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, I have a question. So, how do you guys react, or what do you guys do if an ex-employee calls for and does an oh my goodness,
Files a complaint?
file a complaint? Yes.
Go ahead. Jeff, you first, then Ken. Go ahead.
Okay, so we know that happens. It happens frequently. We actually ask questions of that person to be a valid, what we call a formal complaint. It has to be a current employee or a representative of to be a formal complaint. And that's where we would actually write a complaint out. A non-formal complaint, which is the way we might handle that, unless the allegations are so egregious, we would ask them, do you have proof that they still exist? Like, because we get a lot of people who leave businesses and then want to call us and march us in there. So I guess we understand that happens, but we ask them, do you have someone that still works there that you know that's willing to be part of this, to file this complaint, or can you prove to us that the hazard still exists? How long since you worked there? So we look into that. I guess I'm trying to make the point, we don't just take that and get in our cars and come down to the business. Does that help? Okay.
Ken, similar? Or?
Identical.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to move on to our last subject.
You got one more question over there.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't know what your last subject is, but here's two questions, and for either of the experts or all of you, any of your experts. Two questions. If an OSHA inspector is on the premises investigating a complaint and they see something that wasn't related to the complaint, say a gas bottle that wasn't chained down or some non-flagrant but obvious violation, could the investigator penalize for that if it wasn't part of the complaint? The other question is about record keeping. If a company has a robust health and safety program and it's obvious that they do have a health and safety program and they have records of harnesses bought or masks or respirators issued or hard hats issued, but the employees are under their own control and free will to use them, what would be the take on that?
Let me do the second one. I'll let you answer the first. How's that? The employer's take on that particularly is it's the employer's responsibility to make sure that they wear the equipment. So most employers are going to do job hazard analysis, and with protective equipment particularly, you're required to do a PPE hazard assessment. Say, this is the task they're performing, this is the PPE that's required, and then you need to train your employees on what's required, how to wear it, when they need to wear it. So I don't think there's a situation where, you know, you can wear it or not. Maybe, I think years ago in DOT, they had a requirement, anybody operating a tractor, mowing the lawns, you see them on the side of the roads, right? Had to have a hard hat on. You don't see that anymore. You see them with ball caps because there's no fall hazard when you're out mowing the lawn. But DOT had that requirement, all right? So that was an optional thing at this point if they want to wear a hard hat versus, but most protective equipment, the employers identified that hazard and then to say this is what you need to wear. So we're looking at, when we look at it, is there a hazard? And then if we find a hazard, then we're trying to determine what kind of training was provided to that employee by the employer.
So I'll quickly add to that and then answer your first piece. I agree. I've always said I'd rather a one-page safety and health program that's effective than a 600-page one that sits on the shelf. So yeah, you may have proof that you bought it and had it, and we have this equipment. But again, I'll go back to my earlier comments. Were people taught how to use it? There's a whole section on fall protection, on not just giving it to people, training and educating them on what to tie off to, how to use it. So it's a start. There is a point when the employee is responsible. I don't want you to think that the employer is ultimately always responsible. I've seen employees throw safety glasses on the ground. We're reasonable or try to be in that manner. To your first point, yeah, so when they enter with a complaint, it's going to be what's called a focused inspection. And you can read what that is in the field operation manual. They're going to stay focused to those items. If they're walking the site or during an interview, they see something that could potentially be hazardous or needs to be fixed, could they cite that? Absolutely, but they first have to do what's called expand the inspection. And they would notify you of that. So they would step aside. The procedure is they would notify their area office, say, hey, I'm seeing some other hazards here. I want to expand beyond the scope. The manager at the office would say, absolutely, go ahead, trust their judgment, or why, and document that in the file. That should be documented in the OSHA file where it says inspection was expanded due to interview statements or something like that. So can you be cited? Yes, but there's a step there first.
So I'm just going to hold the questions until we get to the last part, finish the last part of the presentation, which is on Ken's side. I'm going to comment on your questions, though. When my client has an accident on site and calls me, hopefully calls me quickly, the first thing I do is make sure they do a walkthrough and look for everything else, because anything that's open and obvious could get jotted down. And so make sure you have an accident on site, have your safety person or your environmental person, whoever it is, go through everything because, as I said, when OSHA knocks on the door, even if it's focused or not, I want everything in perfect shape. Secondly, for those of you who, if you're an accounting firm, this doesn't apply to you, but have a safety program. Actually, and if you're an accounting firm, you should have an emergency program. You should have an escape program. You should have what to do if there's a tornado or a hurricane or whatever. So all of you should have safety issues either in your employee policies, your handbook, or in a separate safety manual. It's important. Have policies. Why? Because your employees need to be told what to do. If you have an emergency, here's what you do. Contact X. Leave the building, etc. So you all should have some form of a safety program, whether it is a 30 or 40-page program because you're in the construction business or you're in the white-collar world and it's emergency preparedness. Have it in your policies. With that, I'm going to move to the last part of this program and keep us on time with the introduction of, you heard at the beginning that Jeff and USDOL's jurisdiction is all of you private employers with one employee or more. They can come in, they can inspect, they can cite, they can penalize, they can order you to fix things. And Ken's agency, Connecticut OSHA, is the same, but in the public sector with municipalities and the state and state agencies. But there's one thing that Ken's, maybe more than one, but at least one thing that Ken's agency does that is beneficial to all of you, which is its safety consultation program. So with that introduction, I'm going to have Ken explain what the program is and how it will benefit all of you on your training and other issues. So Ken, go ahead and explain the program and tell them what you do for the private sector.
So Congress in 1970, when they put the OSHA Act into effect, did something that was the smartest thing that most of the time you think down in Washington, they just don't have a lot of brains, right? They just don't logically do things. But they created the on-site consultation program for employers. And what they basically said is, okay, we've got the power to go out and cite people, but we need to give employers a chance to be able to correct things and to have assistance through whatever mechanism it is to make sure that their workplace is safe and healthy if they want to. So they created the on-site consultation program. It's available in all 50 states. Every state in the country runs an on-site program. So in Connecticut, because we have the public sector jurisdiction, we run the on-site program for our public sector folks, and we have separate people that do it for our private sector folks. So here's pretty much how it works. Employer either gets cited by OSHA, they decide that they had an accident, but it wasn't reportable, but we can't let this happen again. They want to be proactive in their health and safety program to have the best possible program. They've had too many injuries and their mod rate starts to go up and they say we need to get that reduced. How do we do that? So they call our office. It's a simple phone call. Online you can go to CONN-OSHA.com and you'll see an online consultation request form. But you can basically just call the office, says, I'd like a consultant to come out. I got cited. We're going to say, send me copies of the citation so we can see what you need help with. Or I have a machine shop that I'm just not so sure that we're in compliance. Can you come out and take a look at it? So we go in for any and all reasons. In the private sector, there's employee limitations on what we can do. All right? If it's designed for the small employer, and that's defined as up to 250 employees. So we can do a full scope, wall-to-wall consultation for 250 or less. If it's over 250, between 250 and 5, it's got to be limited scope. We're still going to come in, but we can't do a wall-to-wall. We got to break it up, say, listen, we'll do here, then let's work on what we found here, then we'll do that. A consultation has to be at the request of an employee, an employer. An employee cannot ask for that. That's how they file complaints. So if you have an issue that's come up, your guys are grumbling a little bit, says, listen, we don't want to file a complaint. I tell union folks all the time in the state, if you got a good relationship, go tell them, listen, I can file a complaint, but I want to work with you. Get the consultation guys in there. And we'll go in and we'll mitigate the same problem, because my guys, whether they're enforcement or whether they're consultants, they have the same training. They just look at it from a different perspective. So they're going to come in free of charge. There's no cost at all. Your taxpayer dollars are paid for the consultation program. They issue no citations or no penalties. They do write up a report when they're done. as the FOM indicates, they're going to do an opening conference. Here's what we're here. Here's what we're going to look at. This is what you're asking me to do. We're going to do a walk around. As I do the walk around, if I find something that would be considered serious by Fed OSHA or considered serious by your CONN-OSHA staff, we're going to tell you that you have to correct it. We're going to write up as a recommendation, but you have to promise me before we go out and start looking at this that you're going to fix it. Because the penalty, if you don't fix it and you renege on that promise, is we have to turn you over to enforcement. So we tell them that right up front. And then when we're done, we do a closing conference. This is what we found. We write it up in a report. That employer gets a report. It's 100% confidential. I can promise you, even in our computer database, that I can go on and look at what's consultation done. I can look and see what enforcement done. I can even look and see what the feds did. But just folks cannot look and see what my consultation folks did. There's that much of a barrier set in between consultation and enforcement. We need the employer to be comfortable that if we go out, we're not talking to the feds, and we don't. And we've had calls from some of the federal people. Have you been out at such and such a site? What'd you find? I won't even tell them that we've been there.
I think twice in my 22 years I've seen a consultation program turn someone over to the federal investigator. Twice, I think.
Yeah, we don't do it. Why?
Very, very rare.
Because I've said it, public sector, first of all, it just doesn't happen for whatever reason. But in the private sector, if we don't get the abatement that we need on the recommendations that we found or the hazards that we have identified, not only is my consultant calling out, but then their manager's calling out. And I've had to make a handful of phone calls over my career to say, listen, I'm your third call. I'm your last call. I need cooperation. What can we do to get this stuff fixed? Because sometimes it's a big fix. You know, I've got to put up an enclosed ladder that's going to cost me $15,000. I don't have the money for that. I need some time to do that. We'll work with you on time frames. We give extensions all the time. Even in enforcement, if there's time-related issues or issues going on, we'll give extensions. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we need abatement. We need corrective action. Why? We want employees to be safe. But when you call us as an employer, now we've got a partner. We've got somebody with the same mentality that wants their employees to be safe. So we come in, we kind of do the same physical work. I can tell you we just had a consultant that went up in a public sector site, had to do some air monitoring. It was for isocyanates. And we just got our bill from the lab for that. And because in consultation, we pay for 100% of everything, right? So not only are we paying for the guy to come out and do the work for you and to write the report and do all that, but in the health end of it, we've got the equipment and we've got the lab analysis. So if you do noise monitoring, we have noise instrumentation and noise dosimeters. If you need air sampling done for contaminants in the workplace, we have air sampling pumps, multiple different kinds. We have media for that. We have a laboratory. Connecticut OSHA pays 100% of that tab for the laboratory analysis. And the last one we did, it was somewhere around $2,000 per sample for analysis. We did about 10 samples. So we just bought a $20,000 bill. Our grant from the feds allows us to do that. Happy to do it for the employer. Why? We want to make sure that their employees are safe. Do they need respiratory protection? Do we need improved ventilation? And when we're looking at those hazards, we're going to hierarchy them. So we're going to say, what can we do? Can we eliminate the hazard first? Can we substitute the hazard for maybe something less hazardous if it's a chemical or product? Last thing that we're going to look at is PPE, because there's a hierarchy of controls that we look at when we do that. But ultimately, we're giving recommendation and guidance to the employer to decide how they want to handle it, as long as we get the corrective action for the hazards that we've identified.
So just to highlight, it's free, and I'm going to ask you about the application process, but I think in the slides, which you have in your written materials, and I think they're available online as well, it's free, and not only is it to protect your employees, but you can use it as a tool that, you know, for legal defense. If you ever get cited by OSHA and say, wait a minute, we've got this, we went through all this, and OSHA is going to look kindly on that you actually took proactive steps. So this is a real benefit for CONN-OSHA to provide, and thankfully the federal government set this up. And you all, if you have any concerns about your PPE, your fumes, your auditory controls, et cetera, safety, apply. Get them in, take a look at it.
And you can trust the firewall, believe me.
Yeah.
I sit on the national group that oversees all the consultation programs. They won't even let enforcement people from federal OSHA audit their programs. There's a big firewall on that. So when we look at their program, it has to be someone unrelated to actual compliance officers and enforcement. So it's real. They don't call us.
One thing that Josh, when we ahead of time, we went back and forth with questions, and I want to answer one of your questions that you didn't ask me. But our consultation program cannot OSHA-proof you. Right? We cannot prevent fines. If there's a program visit from either my folks in the CONN-OSHA or Jeff's folks throughout the region, and there means it's not a complaint, it's not an accident, it's not a fatality, but they're there because your name kicked up and you're in a certain industry or whatever. The promise is if we're under consultation doing that, that the feds will go away until we get that visit completed. Once the visit's completed and we're done, you're fair game for them. However, if we're involved in a consultation and a complaint comes in on the federal side or an accident happens, we have to back out in consultation. We have to allow them to do that. Now, there are times when they'll call us and say, listen, we have a complaint at XYZ. We showed up at site and they said you guys are there. We're willing to back off, or we're willing just to look at that item over here if you're going over here. And we'll have that conversation, because at that point the employer said, we're there, and now I'm trying to protect the employer if I can on that complaint to make sure that they focused only on the complaint and not expand it. So sometimes we'll have those conversations, but they're very limited in scope. But if the feds come in because they got an accident, they have a complaint, and they've got to look at the same thing that the employer asked us to, we're backing out. The feds take priority on that.
Ken, to make it easy for the folks in the room and online, how do they apply? If anyone wants to take advantage of the consultation program.
Call our office, 860-263-6900. Ask for Ann Bracker, she's my program manager. Secondly, you go on to www.connosha, one word, CONNOSHA.com, or you can go on to Connecticut Labor Department's website and get to the safety part. But connosha.com gets us to our page, and there's a link right there for for consultation requests. It's a fillable form. You push send, it comes to us.
Great.
And we'll contact you.
Thank
We're
you.
about 30 to 45 days backlogged right now. Depends on the severity of it and how quick because the feds are out there for responding and that type of thing.
Okay. So going to ask for any closing comments from the two of you, and then we have a couple minutes left if there's any other questions. Otherwise, you got one? Okay. We'll end it, and we'll be around for a few minutes for any questions during the break. I'll take the closing comments and the question, okay?
We got as well, so.
Okay.
I'm glad you mentioned about your accounting firm example as far as policies in general. It's probably the most common questions I get in my role at CBIA. I had a company call and say, what sort of safety handbook should I have? So Jeff, I know there isn't a specific content, if you will, but from your perspective, what sort of guidelines, if I'm going to start a safety handbook, what are some of the things that you think it should have?
What, a safety program?
Yeah, safety handbook.
A safety handbook?
Yes.
Well, I think it should address, generally, what's the workplace, what's the safety and health culture, who has the ability to actually, stop the work that's dangerous. But the safety and health program should really cover the hazards in the workplace, what is specific in that industry, and how people are trained and educated to avoid them. In a nutshell, for me, from my perspective, what are you looking at? So if you're a roofing company, right, your safety program should cover what hazards the roofing industry is exposed to, what tools are they using. That's kind of, but the culture's big there too. Looking at, many people have gone with, they gave everyone the power in a company to stop safety and involve those people, to stop hazardous conditions. So I don't know if that's a big question. So.
Frequently, when the question comes in to me, they would like you to say, I'd like the safety handbook to describe X, Y, Z, and you answered it. There isn't a specific X, Y, Z. It's more culture that the handbook should create as opposed to specific issues.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of safety programs and a lot of safety directors be what I call exercises in paper, and that's easy to find out, and that's what we don't want. We want, someone truly has the authority to say, hey, this is hazardous, get out of the way, why'd you put them in that situation? And just kind of look at the scope of things they're exposed to or could potentially be exposed to.
Ken, you have a comment on this? I have a comment on it as well.
No, I think having somebody sit down and read a book for a week and then you throw them out into the job is, You know, how much are they going to remember out of that? You know, you just don't see that. So specificity is really important on that for the employees. We had a little sidebar when we were talking about, I think your question over there on somebody that was just there for a couple of days with the workers' comp question and all that. And under the Michaels administration, when Secretary Michaels came on board, he was very concerned about employees in the first part of their employment, whether it's the first couple of days, the first couple of weeks, the first couple of months, of seeing a higher injuries than they should have. And most of it's because there's training involved. Train them on the work hazards that they have, not so much on the overall policy. You have to do that also, but train them on the specifics of what they're going to do, and I think we can minimize the injuries that way.
I'll just comment on that, Philip, that when we draft policies for our clients, we represent businesses, we, like Jeff said, want to help the client create a culture of compliance, a culture of safety. But we also want to make sure that the employer is putting every employee on notice of what their expectations are, right? Every employee needs to be told in writing that they must comply with OSHA guidance. They must comply with the PPE rules. They must engage in activities that are safe at all times. And equally important, what happens when they don't. We want to make it clear to employees that when they violate these policies, they're either going to be disciplined or they're going to be terminated, and that we have no tolerance for behavior that could endanger the safety of other employees. So those policies need to be put in place because they're part of creating a culture. And also, when OSHA comes calling, they ask you for your safety policies. And you want to make sure that you make it clear that, of course, we told our employees to always act safe. Of course, we told our employees to comply with all rules, regulations, all guidance. So from the employer perspective, very important that you have put your employees on notice of what those expectations are, and that the failure to meet those expectations will have consequences.
And one big item to add, and you just raised a point in my mind. One, do you have a work rule? So when we look at the employee misconduct offense, this stuff could be incorporated in any safety program. Do you have a work rule in place? Here's a big one. Was it communicated in a way that the employee understands it? A language they understand? Because we've run into that, right? People don't speak English. They throw them something in English, say, okay, sign it, and move on. Well, how's that effective, right? And secondly, did you as an employer, do you have a self-inspection program where you take steps to discover violations or that people are adhering to those safety rules? That's kind of what we look at. So is that built into your program? We have, yourselves, bring someone like him in, or a consultation service, anything to show us that you're taking steps to, make sure people are adhering to those rules.
All right, final comments.
I have one more question online. Does the panel have a perspective regarding how AI, artificial intelligence, applies to safe operations in the manufacturing process? Are there any trends? Are you for it or against it?
I'm against AI.
In general?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think we've even dealt with it yet. It's not much that's been done in that with CONN-OSHA.
Well, I can't get too deep into that. I was just in D.C. last week, and I'll just say OSHA's starting to look at that. Yeah. I don't have any particular comments, but it's an interesting development in the world of manufacturing, robotics, AI, what hazards come with that. Like anything, we're going to look at it like everything else, like we did COVID. Yes, it may increase things, but also when there's new technology, new hazards are created. So I think that's real. I can't get into that right now deeply about AI, but there's people looking at it and trying to evaluate it. So great question.
And while I always try to inject humor into the discussion on AI, I don't think that there's a replacement for humans at this level. Obviously, that may happen, especially when you have robots spinning around and looking for hazards and that type of thing, which certainly is now becoming more and more prevalent. But I don't think that there's, in the next 50 years, going to be anything to substitute for human observation and human activity. That may change, especially in the manufacturing processes and that type of thing. But who knows? Let's see what happens. I mean, we've got semi-self-driving autos. We may have semi-self-automated safety robots at some time.
I have a question over here.
Okay.
Hi, good morning. So you have a lot of good information, and we have had CONN-OSHA come to our plant. My question is about what more can we do, or what's your recommendation so when you have a little infraction, stepping on a ladder incorrectly, or, you know, PPE not worn properly, what do you recommend training, excuse me, retraining, and I'm just questioning the value of the training record and what you're looking for when you come. Obviously, we don't want a worse accident, but how effective is it? What should we be doing? What else could we be doing?
Under the fork truck standard, it actually requires that if there's an incident that happened, that you go back and retrain that employee on that. I wish every standard would have that, because it's all about the training and the reinforcement of what you want to have happen. You already know what the problem is because you've identified a ladder issue or you've identified a PPE issue. So the question is, retrain your employees on it to say, listen, let's talk about this one more time. It doesn't have to be a formal training. It doesn't have to be a hammer over the head. It just has to be, listen, our requirement is you put your safety glasses on. Every time I come over here, you're operating a piece of equipment without it. You've got to wear it or we're going to have to take disciplinary action. That's not where we want to go. You know, let's put this ladder up correctly. Let's put this PPE on correctly.
And
simple like that.
from my perspective, I told you 800 compliance officers. They were about to cover 8 million workplaces. So we're going to try to not go to the smaller infractions if we can help it. But those things can turn into bigger infractions. So I go back to a practical approach, not just training people, because I've seen people in training courses. I've actually sat in a couple and in the back like this sleeping, or, you know, what did they take from it, right? Why'd you do that? Why didn't you do that? What's the root cause? And again, how do you stop it from happening again? So people always take shortcuts. That's human nature.
And I would just comment that on this culture of compliance issue and having the policies in place, you can't have the policies without discipline, without people that are taking the responsibility seriously to be a manager, because managers must manage, and to deal with these issues, and then when they see something, to deal with it. I'll just give you ladder examples, because I've happened to have several ladder issues that are, accidents are incredibly common and oftentimes debilitating, because they're up high and they slip and they can die from it. I've had torn knees, I've had shattered arms, massive head injuries. So, but what's the problem with ladders? They're so quick. I mean, people just, they're moving them quickly, they're not taking the precaution. Someone in a, if hopefully a managerial role or even part of the team, needs to be trained that don't let your people do it because it's going to cost us a lot of money. Oh, and let's also remember that other cost that we haven't talked about, not just OSHA and your lawyer, insurance, right? Because when you have a claim, whether it's workers' comp or general liability, you're either going to get an increased premium, or you're going to get dropped, or you're going to have an audit. And so every accident is the seed of a larger problem financially. So training your people to recognize these things and not letting them go by, and also creating that culture. But there must be, your managers have to manage. It's as simple as that. And I think we're out of time. One more, and then we're going to take a break, and we'll be available for a few
Just
minutes.
one thing to kind of piggyback off, it's also when personal accountability is not a thing anymore, especially if it's a repetitive action, then it should be the managers and even other superiors that provide disciplinary action to prevent it. Because if it's not happening with the individual, then somebody needs to step up and insist on accountability.
With that,
Agreed.
Ken, thank you very much. Jeff, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.